Kia ora everyone and welcome to this HR Chats with me, Terada. This is a series where we're chatting to some of the leading lights in HR in New Zealand. We're looking at interesting trends, ideas and development in the world of human resources. We've got a diverse range of people lined up. We hope you will enjoy their opinions, and if there is anything that you would like to hear about or people that you would hear from, feel free to stay tuned to find out how you can contact us and let us know. Today, however, we are speaking with Kavita Khanna. She's on the board of HRNZ. She brings a couple of decades of experience of all things people. Currently, the Director of People and Capability in Tonking Taylor. And if you're not familiar with Tonking Taylor, they're a leading environmental and engineering consulting business with nearly 1,100 employees across New Zealand and Australia. And interestingly, particularly at this current situation and time, they're involved with a wide range of projects with a deep commitment to helping communities through science and engineering, and they've been key players in such events as the natural disasters in Christchurch and Kaikoura, so perfectly placed to see what is happening in communities as well as in business. So, Kavita, welcome aboard.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here and really grateful for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
We're pleased to have you. What has surprised you the most about the whole COVID situation?
A couple of things have really stood out for me, and that's why I wanted to talk today. One was the human resilience that we saw. We were put through a lot during the lockdowns and thereafter, but it stood out for me, and related to that is leadership and how it played out in the context of the country. If you think about the country as an organization, somebody said to me that the chief transformation officer, or the greatest chief transformation officer of all times, was COVID. COVID really tested us. It made us rethink fundamentally how we live, how we work, and it also made us test our concepts around who is a leader, what do we do in these times. So with all the challenges that were put forward, it was a moment of leadership that every one of us displayed, and we were all leaders there, which is why I think now is a moment to pause and explore and rethink what is leadership, who we call a leader, and what we do within organizations to develop that leadership. Because the leader we saw in COVID was the everyday leader, and it was almost as if it got democratized. So previously, leadership was an exclusive domain. Leaders were the standout figure, whereas the leaders during COVID, and in fact, most of the other movements that we're seeing now, they are everyday people. They are you, me, my neighbor. We were all leaders. So it wasn't this exclusive concept. And I want to tap into that fundamentally and challenge our existing thinking about leadership, and really think about, as an organization at a system level, what are we doing to make something which needs to be fit for purpose today, and how we talk about leadership and how we create these leaders for the future.
It's probably not an outcome that people might have predicted prior to the sort of the COVID pandemic. I mean, there's plenty of things that we might have thought would need reinventing, but to fundamentally rethink the notion of leadership is not necessarily one that I had on my slate of things to do.
Yes, and look, it's been in the making for a while now, but technology and internet and that connectivity that we have, that's what's enabled us to really think about, should we be growing leadership as though it was this perfect vision of a person embodying everything that we want to see, or is actually giving each of us that opportunity, that moment in time where we feel empowered to really lead. And what is the role of leader? Is it to be this font of wisdom, or is the leader a nurturer and enabler? And so that's the main concept. And I think there are people who have been thinking about this, but COVID has given us an opportunity to press pause and, as it were, put a different track on.
that Tonking Taylor looks at a lot of stuff around the future of things. Had they done much work? Had you done much work around the kind of notion of leadership in a crisis, the changing role of leadership and various other things as part of the driver for the work that you do?
We have been thinking about this for a while now. Doug Johnson, our CEO or managing director, um, in 2016 helped lead a reorganization, and what that was essentially was what I now call rebooting the whole organization, so that the old concepts around leadership, around what was important to our clients, around what was important to our people, was all up for grabs. And I mean, we're not by no means transformed. It's hard to transform when there's not a burning platform. And what COVID has done is it's actually helped us to fast forward, accelerate some of these conversations. So we're having some really interesting discussions in the business about leadership, about how do we think about us,
And
and
what where are those conversations leading? Have you come with any conclusions at this point in time around the nature of leadership and the
no,
need to rethink it?
the need to rethink came through a series of interventions that we did, which were mainly economic response to the market, right? So our clients were saying that we needed to be more responsive, and we were thinking through how do we make our people more responsive, and all of that led us to the fact that actually we need to enable our people to make decisions closer to the client.
So essentially devolving leadership down the chain.
Well, that's where I think that's the devolving suggests that in the first place, there's this fount of knowledge that sits somewhere at the top that then, cascades down. Whereas the way, and to a large extent, it is because of what TNT is like an organization. We're 25% employee owned, very intelligent workforce, highly challenging, which makes for an interesting work life for me. But what that also means is that people are really interested in and very comfortable with challenging. I wouldn't say challenging authority, but feeling autonomy, or that sense of autonomy. And what all of that meant is that leadership wasn't necessarily up at the top.
And we've seen a little bit of, well, a lot of discussion actually around the nature of leadership in general over the last couple of months, and that real breakdown of and breaking down of the myth of the perfect leader, and that kind of concept of the flawed leader.
Yeah, the reality is the concept of this perfect leader who inspires you, who has this vision and who'll tell you all the purpose, etc., that's been pushed by the $5 billion leadership industry time and time again. And we look to these people, these leaders, to be perfect everything. But the reality is most of them are human beings, imperfect human beings. Some get caught out, some are found out when they die. But it's getting harder and harder with social media and with the kind of connectivity that we have to hide behind that myth of being perfect. So yes, it was easier to be perfect back in the day 200 years ago when it was slow mail and things like that. Today, you do something, you say something, it's recorded for posterity and it gets played over and over again. So you can't hide.
And we've
So,
seen, we've seen a lot of that sort of rise of things, and as you say, through social media. And not only have we had the kind of the COVID change with, the huge, the global momentum in the last couple of weeks of the lives of the Black Lives Matter movement as well, which has really propelled, the notion of people challenging leadership and putting and the rise of new citizen leaders. into the global sort of consciousness.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the interesting, I mean, when you look at our team of 5 million, it wasn't because Jacinda Ardern told us to do it. Yes, um, mm, Jacinda and Ashley Bloomfield made a really good case, but the leadership was in each of us deciding for ourselves and for our communities that this was the right thing to do. So there was a moment of leadership there, which did not necessarily come because we were listening to authority. It was a decision each of us made. And that's what I've seen play out throughout my life, actually, is the fact that you can't make people do what you want them to do unless you're standing over them. And that's impossible, near enough impossible. So if I want to switch off my mind, I can pretend to be working, but that's not going to be good for anyone. So you actually have to buy into all of this. And the real effort comes from when people take ownership of and take autonomy and feel empowered to deliver something.
So in a workplace scenario, then, for example, does that also involve a rethinking, a rebooting of organizations, organizational structures, and all of that? Is now the time to kind of relook at where we're sitting with the notion of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our current organization structures and systems, the traditional ones, are so counterproductive to getting to the outcomes we want to achieve. And this is not something new, right? A lot of experiment has been happening way back in 68 even, when this whole concept of office and leadership and pyramid and everything came along. From way back then, small units of experimentation has been happening to more recently holocracies and a whole range of things like
So
hierarchy and things like.
what is a holocracy?
Oh, I wish that's a whole another podcast we should reserve.
Let's keep that one in reserve. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is essentially allowing people to, like you said, citizen leadership in the workplace. It is about
Because we,
believing that human beings are intelligent and allowing them to use their intelligence.
God, gee, I don't know if we want that to catch on, do we? We are seeing, the rise in the kind of the democracy of experience where, simply being the cleverest person in the room is not enough to legitimize leadership, and that can be challenged from, from people either within the lowest echelons of a sector all the way through to people outside it as well.
Yep, absolutely. And think about this. How do you the traditional idea of the leader is that they know more and they can provide direction. But how do you get across a vast range of knowledge in a world that's changing almost exponentially? What I know today, more than 90% of it is going to be redundant in 5 years' time. And so how do you keep up? And if you're going to lead through being the smartest person in the room, you can forget about leading like that. The pressures on you is going to be enormous, and you'll just be playing this catch-up game. Or you will, like some of the others do, talk through your hat.
In terms of that change, what's the responsibility for organizations and businesses to pay more than just a lip service to shaping society, and the need for them to be change makers?
There is a huge pressure. So it is the society that is forcing the business to re-look at what its purpose is and how it's interacting with the community. The interesting thing that's happening, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, is that it's not just that people look to politicians for the official policies, but some of the changes are actually coming through the workplace. In New Zealand, the conversation around the 4-day week, that did not come because the government said it. In fact, quite the reverse. It came through somebody in an organization, in Perpetual Guardian, saying that this was important and carrying that conversation not just within New Zealand but also overseas. And then you hear almost 2 years later, the PM talking about, yeah, maybe we should have it. And so things are reversing, but it's not just that. If you look at any organization, as the new generations are becoming more and more socially aware, they are putting pressure on organizations to behave differently. And all of that means that if you want, or whether it is because of the moral reasons of who you are as an organization and the values you hold, or because it's purely commercial, if you want to stay relevant, you actually have to engage.
And a lot of it, I think, had that long discussion for the last couple of years about the why. Why do you do this? Why should I come and work for you? What,
Yeah.
that movement of people wanting just a bit of actual purpose in their day-to-day lives. How's it been at Tonkin and Taylor? What's the kind of the changes or the experience you've had there?
It is, like I said before, it's an authentic organization. What you see is what you get. Like many other organizations, firstly, we've been here 60 years and we are evolved from an engineering consultancy to an environmental and engineering consultancy. And there is a testing business. The interesting thing about all of this is that we're a bunch of people who really like what we do, think, and right from get-go have been thinking that this work is not just about us and about making a profit. It's about leaving this legacy for New Zealand Inc. and Australia, where we are now becoming bigger and bigger. And it's not just about making a profit or about winning all these awards. It's also about making a difference in the lives of the people that we employ and in the lives of the communities that we interact with. And it's in this lengthy statement in our pathway document where we talk about all of this. But it's not just talk. When it comes to decisions, sometimes you can be the HR person in the room holding the people space, and in other organizations you might have to be standing up and jumping up and down. In my organization, often it's not me who's that voice, it's the rest of the organization that's talking about people, purpose, and it's quite different in that. And our culture has been easy to get to this thinking from that sense of um,
Yeah, which no doubt must make it, a little bit simpler when you're talking about kind of change and investment in communities, because you've got so many voices within the organization. It's a large organization. They all have their own, vested interests within community groups and things. You've been running a bit of an experiment, I think, with your team since the beginning of the year.
Yeah, it came about end of last year when I was talking to another HR colleague friend and talking about what I wanted to do with my team. And, I said I want them to really own this and drive it. They to feel like they own it, and this is what I want, and this is all about the team. And she just turned around and said, "Have you ever discussed this with your team?" And I said, "Well, no." And she said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, that means then it's my vision." And she said, "You'll have to start somewhere, and then you'll have to kind of let them run with it." So beginning of this year, we had something which I called the People and Capability Unconvention. We went away and we had this, January, man, that was so long ago. But we
It was a long time ago.
yeah, we went away and we talked about what it would be like to be a self-managed, high-performing team, and what did it mean for the team itself. And so I got the team to actually say what did they think they were going to do, and what behaviors would they need to change in order to be this self-managed team. And I knew in my head that it was going to be quite a change, because um, it's this whole concept of it's not just being given the authority, but it's also being willing to take the risks. Taking decisions is not that. You've just taken a decision. You have to think through the consequences. You have to start thinking about the interconnections and about what impact your decisions have on others, and asking the entire team to think like that. It was going to be an interesting exercise. The long and short of it is we've been now running like that for the last 6 months. It's given me a lot of freedom. So as a leader of that PNC team, I am now engaged in other things, and it's been quite liberating for me. But
Did you, how much, like, it's obviously was a great theory and a great sort of, thought exercise with the aim at, I suspect gradually from January moving through some of this stuff. How well did it set you up for the moment where suddenly we were in that lockdown? Like, did it present you in some ways with the best possible experiment for your experiment?
Yes, but let's just wind back. While I say all of this, like, don't get me wrong, it is hard work.
Yeah.
You have to, in the setup, you have to be talking to the team constantly. The other thing is you have to remove your ego. You just can't let it get in the way. You have to be willing to be challenged. You have to be willing to suck it up. And if your view, even though you know that's the right thing to do, if someone else brings a contrary view and they want to run with that, you have to sit on your hands and let that happen. And for me personally, the biggest thing that I had to deal with was this. I come from a family and from a place where failure is not an option. So I really don't like failure. And for me, it was willing to let go of this concept of, if this doesn't work, it's not failure. It's an experiment. And everybody on this experiment is having a go at this, and it's okay. It's a learning opportunity. That switching off of that self, it was really hard. But the point is that it was a sustainable model. So back to your question, which is what happened when COVID happened and we had all got to go to lockdown. Our team, I keep hearing that they just stepped up, and in the matter of possibly a week, we had a whole set of resources for the managers and people working remotely to understand what this new experience was, learning stuff, guides for managers, um, touching base surveys, things like that. The stuff that we would normally do in a year, we got it all ready within a week, and everybody was ready to go in terms of lockdown.
If you could look back at, to what you were thinking in January to the position you're in now, and you talk, that whole sense of failure and not being an option, and there would have been, I suspect, a couple of things that you thought might have worked that in retrospect you think actually that was a mistake. If anyone was looking at reorganizing things, is there a couple of mistakes that you think happened where you went, look, I wouldn't do that again, or this was something that no one could have predicted and that's changed?
Possibly, and I'm kind of good question.
Yeah,
Uh,
thanks. Or
uh,
indeed successes, things that happened
look,
that were a success almost inadvertently.
first, let me talk about some of the learnings. The thing that I underestimated is how much hardwired we are to look at somebody to provide a direction, and what happens in the absence of that, and how much you need to prepare around that. So it's not enough to say, now you're all going to make decisions and then bow out. That doesn't work. You still have to be around. So there's been a couple of hiccups where there's loss of trust a little bit because say I wasn't available and I was busy doing other stuff, and then it was like, you've left us to fend
It's kind of an
for
irony, isn't
ourselves.
it?
Yeah,
That in order to sort of devolve leadership in a way and to reintroduce leadership at different levels requires quite a lot of strong leadership.
it does, and that's that's the new leader. There was this book that I came across by Susan Bain called Quiet, and it talks about the introverted leader. And and I kind of really relate to that because, most of when we talk about leadership, it's somebody standing up there, bigger than life, larger than life personality, or somebody emphatic, um, is very articulate. Whereas what she talks about is the introvert, reflective person who is in the background, very much influencing and kind of growing, as it were, the talent rather than worried about being in the front. Doesn't mean that they are not there to lead, but it's a self-effacing kind of a leadership. Yeah.
Leadership's been at the forefront, of global conversation through the pandemic. The quiet leader versus the loud leader, and we've seen, if you're following a lot of the sort of the political articles, some of the leaders who are most visual at the moment are those political leaders: Jacinda Ardern, Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel, Trump. All very different styles of leadership that, in many ways, or have been put upon the world stage to embody the change in leadership. And people are saying that Jacinda Ardern leadership, which is very, very different. She seems to be, she's doesn't, you've got the press conferences, but she's not that kind of talk at you leader that you might get from say England or America. In the HR world and in your sector, have you been looking at a lot of those kind of conversations around that change and what people want from a leadership
Absolutely.
concept at this time?
That's pretty much what we talk about a lot of times.
Yeah.
Particularly Jacinda's leadership and breaking it down, notwithstanding the fact that it was not just Jacinda's leadership, it was a whole range of people, including the team of 5 million. But what is remarkable about, let's say, our Prime Minister is that non-ego state that she when she gets into it. Okay, let me qualify this. She is the most powerful when she is this non-ego, non-defensive person who is willing to be okay to have made a mistake, and she is empowering the health officials to respond to the crisis. So it's not about wielding the power, but it's about enabling and empowering the others. When she does that, those are the most powerful moments of her leadership. And then flip it back, and when you see the same person being occasionally defensive, that's when you feel like, oh, that's a bit of a letdown. And so that's one of the things that I've been thinking about, is to expect somebody to be constantly perfect is not realistic. And it's the same for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if in many ways they're examples of everything that you've been talking about from the beginning, and not only a change in what we expect in leadership, but a way that leadership is delivered, the way the medium of the modern world of social media and various things has changed what we expected. And I think that great example of that is for example, we've had a lot of conversation in HR around leaders speaking directly to staff, from home, Facebook Live. Jacinda Ardern is particularly adept at that. There's a sense of egalitarianism. There's a sense of kind of intimacy that you wouldn't normally get around a board table or on a stage at a conventional conference with the sector. Is that a part of that quiet, loud leader thing too? That ability to allow the medium to remove any of the constraints, press conferences, whatnot, and to speak directly to essentially your staff. We're the staff of 5 million. Tonkin and Taylor have their 1,100 staff.
Yeah, it's really dismantling the organization structure, isn't it? And this might sound really kooky, but way back in 2016, when Donald Trump jumped onto Twitter and started directly talking to his people, not through the whatever everyone else was talking. We all thought, what was that about? But that's been really effective for him, and that's the We may not like him, we may have different political views and things like that, but the fact is that the influence of a voice talking directly to the people without all these structures in between, that's the thing that we can take out of that. And that's the thing that played out in what you just said before, which is your Facebook Live or Zoom chats. Doug, our MD, he did a series of these videos talking to our people, letting us know what was happening within the business, just to keep us abreast of what was happening. And the feedback has been, that's been really useful, because there's no barrier, and this person's the same as you.
And there is, I think there's a difference here as well. It's the leader talking with people to a certain extent through that intimacy of the medium, rather than talking at people. I mean, that's crucial in this day and age, really, isn't it?
Yeah, the interaction, the interactive part is crucial. But that's where are you willing to be allowed to impromptu question?
And to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And to be in a position where you might have to say, look, I don't really know the answer to that. Again, that notion of the flawed leader versus the sort of the perfect leader, and the quiet leader versus the loud leader. What's next in the little sort of foreseeable future for you and your goal there at Tonkin and Taylor?
So we have reinitiated the conversation around what the future of work needs to look like. Part of that is exploring leadership. We've got this concept of shared leadership, and like many other organizations, that's been around for a little while. We've got an existing, let's say, concept that needs breaking down. The good thing is leadership today, as opposed to, say, 5 years ago, is just a portfolio role. And if you notice, I'm not saying it's a leader role, it's a leadership. And so there is a subtle difference in that you're just taking this on for a period of time, and you learn some things new, and then you go and do something else and apply that skill to somewhere else. There's lots more work being done in terms of empowering the individual, and what you said before, I wouldn't call it quite devolving, but we're finding new leaders within the business, and lots of new leaders, and then giving them the rein to do what they do really well. So
Marvelous.
there is a shift.
There's a lot of shift, and we really need to do that, don't we?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Personally, what are you most looking forward to in the next little while on this challenge? Like, what, we've talked about it as sort of as a general thing and the need for it. What is it that, just finally, what is it that you love the most about this challenge?
I'm going back to the days like when I was a child. That was before dinosaurs existed. And my dad used to be someone who encouraged, we were three sisters, and the dining room conversations were arguments, and he encouraged that. And it was sometimes argument for the sake of argument, just because we wanted to, have a point of view and then counter that point of view. What I'm really looking forward to is, in the next year or so, is to really open up this organizational dialogue about culture, about values, and about particularly leadership, and really challenge ourselves to find a new paradigm where, I'm not saying everybody is a leader, because that sounds quite trite. It's more about each of us takes the responsibility of taking this business where we can take it to.
Well, all the very best. I imagine they would have been absolutely fascinating dinner table conversations as well. I can imagine they would have provided a huge amount of entertainment for your father.
Yeah.
We have come to the end of our time. Thank you. All the very best with this sort of ongoing quest to redevelop the notion of leadership and allowing people to take leadership for themselves. Kavita Khanna she's on the board of HRNZ, currently with Tonkin and Taylor, one of our guests in this HR Chats with me, Teresa. As I said at the beginning, over the next few weeks, we'll be chatting with some of the other leading lights in HR around the trends and the ideas evoked through that huge concept of human resources. And as I said, if you've got anything you want to have discussed or anyone you think we should have a chat to, by all means, let us know. And that's all for now.